Alon is joining us from there. He is currently working as Director of Business Development at Exit. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it right. Maybe he can correct it. And he's also a strategy and product advisor for a leading global dairy technology company. Before this, Alon had worked at MSD, Animal Health Intelligence, Allflex, and he has gained invaluable work experience through the years by collaborating with multiple large international companies. He's a Tel Aviv University alumnus, and Alon is a technology and animal monitoring enthusiast. Welcome, Alon.
Thank you.
In respect to overall subject which we are discussing, Alon, as you will agree that the intervention of technology and digitalization can be very different at different level of the need of technology. And I was delighted actually when we were discussing some time back with you that if you draw the need pyramid, then whereas we can see that the addressing of the need of animal at individual level can be the bottom of the need pyramid, but genetics addressal, what Tarun Sridhar also was talking about, can be the top of the need pyramid. But considering the diversity of Indian subcontinent, what do you feel or where do you feel is a sweet spot of digital intervention where we should make the first point of intervention that will make the highest impact in the overall livestock landscape?
So thanks for having me here on this panel, and it's nice to meet you, everyone. And I have to say that I think your question is also a very good continuation to what Tarun just said. And you are asking me for some good news, for me to say what's the sweet spot, where should we have, what's the first technology that we should put in place that will bring us the best return on our investment. And unfortunately, I think there is no one answer here. As you mentioned, the Indian subcontinent, it's big and it's very diverse, and the problems that in some places you're facing are not necessarily the same all over the place. And with a very unique analogy, I will use Israel, my home country, as an example. Both ag-tech companies that I'm involved and was involved in started in Israel. As you know, Israel is very small with its own agricultural challenges. And that's just the reason for the technology to be invented. But after the technology was invented, in my specific case in Israel, there are many good examples, of course, internationally, then the technology had to be modified, and the implementation of the technology has to be modified per country, or actually per geography and per case by case. And this is, I think, something very important to understand. So as Tarun correctly mentioned, of course, very small farms, for example, in the dairy industry, whereas many of the solutions that you modify and try to adapt to mega farms in the US or in China might be less relevant. But there is some kind of common denominator, which is, of course, first of all, the technological backbone, but also your need to understand how are you going to implement the technology. At the end of the day, there's a business that needs to make money out of this technology. And you need to understand what's your go-to-market approach. So the question is not necessarily a technological question. The question is an industry question. It's a marketing question. What's your channel into the market in a specific place? Probably you're not going to go door by door and sell a piece of technology to each farmer, especially not in the very small farm scenarios that you mentioned previously. You really need to start thinking very big and on your channels into the market. So if you decide, and as we mentioned, breeding and feeding are two major challenges, and also, of course, two major power players probably in the industry. So your channel into the market needs to take this into consideration. If you're going to solve a problem with technology together, not only with the government, together with breeding companies or together with feeding companies, be sure you have synergy with your technology and with these companies. So again, to your question, there is no one solution, and I wouldn't say take this solution, start from this. This will give you the biggest impact. The impact will not only be measured in the productivity in the farm. The impact will be in the scale of the implementation. Remember, you need to put whatever technology you choose in many, many farms, very small ones. So it has to make sense to the situation. Specifically for genetic solutions, yes, they are very attractive in this sense. And yes, they are actually on the top of the pyramid. And once you put them in place from the genetic perspective, you're good to go, depending on the genetic solution that you're thinking of. But it takes a long time to approve genetic solutions. It takes a lot of time to develop genetic solutions. And also some genetic maintenance is also required. So I wouldn't say that the genetics will give you the full answer. And of course, it depends if we're talking about dairy, if we're talking about poultry. So I really think I'm coming here as the technological expert, but I want to highlight the fact that it's not only a technical question, of course. You have to understand the exact ecosystem that you have in terms of the channels that you can use to implement the technology.
Thanks, Alon. I think you are more than right when you said that it's all about overall ecosystem rather than seeing the technology in isolation. Because I've also personally seen many places people get sometimes overwhelmed with the concept of technology, and perhaps that's the area where the realization is later on that perhaps it was not well invested, aspect on technology. So you're right. In fact, it's not one sweet spot. Perhaps it's more relevant to the overall, band and understanding of the bandwidth and what is best suited. That needs to be identified. Very contextual point. Thanks, Alon. Alon, much again to the link with the points which Tarun Sridhar was talking about. When it comes to the matter of Israel, we all know that your country has been, phenomenal in terms of getting the best efficiency. But I'm sure it would not have been a very smooth journey for you as well. There would have been a lot of pitfalls. There would have been a lot of failures also. So may I take the opportunity of asking you that what are the challenges in commercialization of technology which you have seen, even in context to Israel, and keeping the mindscape of India kind of country in front of you? What are the suggestions you'd like to put forth before an entrepreneur in India who is there into dairy or poultry segment?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, to the entrepreneur, I would say good luck and take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. So I would say, first of all, in terms of commercializing technological solution to an agriculture industry, the entrepreneur in this case needs to understand he cannot do it alone. You mentioned Israel, for example, very, very different, but the logic behind my answer is similar. So I will just say shortly about Israel. Yes, we have implemented the greatest and latest technologies in our dairy sector, for example. And we had to solve our own problems with this very small land and very expensive resources. Therefore, our cows produce a lot of milk. We're not necessarily the most profitable dairy industry, but we are a very high yielding cows. And this is what we had to do to solve our problem. That's not the only issue. The second reason for success specifically in implementing technological solution in our industry is that we had a quota system and everyone worked together and farmers were not competing against each other due to the quota system. Now, taking that logic and looking into India, what I want to say here is that there are three big challenges you have to take into account. You have to understand your whole ecosystem. I mentioned in my previous answer again what's the channel you're going to use to implement the technology. So you need to understand the whole ecosystem. Jirish mentioned silo data. Silo data means that each different stakeholder in the industry has his own data. No one's sharing it. I've been trying to break down these silos data in different regions, in different capacities in my previous roles. This is one huge problem, but it's just an example of the silo data is just an example of how still the ecosystem is not working together. So you need to break down these barriers, data barriers, commercial barriers, and it leads me to the next issue, which is the business model. You want to introduce new technologies into the industry, think very well who you expect to be paying for these solutions. I urge you to try and not, and I'm talking to the entrepreneur, I urge him not to try and get paid from the farmer. The farmers are the last you should try and get money from. You should work with the channels you want to achieve and to get to. So I think the business model as well has to make sense to your current situation on site. And the last thing is that this many people are not aware of this. We're talking about implementing technological solutions on animals and for animals for the agriculture sector. You need to be on site and to test your solution where you want to implement it. I like to say that people think you need to test, for example, these solutions in all different seasons, right? You have 4 seasons, you need to check it in the summer and in the spring, etc. I think you need to check it in 16 different seasons if you are a global company. And why am I saying 16? Because the summer in Israel is not like the summer in India. It's not like the summer in Ireland. It's not like the summer, unfortunately, in New Zealand. It's not like the summer in Texas. You need to be checking your solution per season, per geography, and there's no way around it. It takes a lot of time. And since it takes a lot of time, you need to go and be on site as fast as possible. So recapping again this answer, I think to commercialize your solution, you need to be on site as fast as possible. You need to have a business model that works very well with your go-to-market channels, and try not to expect the farmer to pay you too much for the solution. Try to build your solution so other companies that probably have a bit more to spend than the farmers themselves are the ones that you're going to work with from a business perspective. And the last is the issue of the silo data. Be sure your solution will work in once these siloed data will be broken up, once the barriers will be removed, either due to regulation or due to commercial interest. These will fall eventually, and you need to be sure your solution will play along with others. As I mentioned in my first answer, there's no one solution. There will be a mixture of solutions. You need to be sure that your solution will be able to work in that mixture ecosystem. You're not going to necessarily be the one-stop shop for the full solution. So I think those are the main things you need to take into consideration when you're trying to commercialize technology into the ag sector.
Thanks, Alon. To me, one of the points what you mentioned is still ringing in my ear, that the cost of the technology should not be charged to the end user. I think that's a very, very important point, because you're adding technology actually to bring or add efficiency in your system, and the customer should be the last person to be thought of in terms of being charged for that. And you're right, absolutely right, because as a case studies, we have seen so many examples where the business case tumbles down when the people are ignoring this basic, fact. A very interesting point indeed. And because ultimately it's all about adding or finding or exploring the efficiency, scope of efficiency. Because even in the project management, we have heard about a terminology called a scope creep. And if somebody is not able to manage scope creep better, it is the inefficiency of the project manager. It is not because of any other person involved in the project. So, Alan, obviously, I mean, much expected questions are there about how Israel has showcased the success and people are very keen actually to learn a few of the tricks. You already have shared a few, but maybe the appetite is more. So one of the my question is coming here that in Israel there are a lot of farms which are large size, and more importantly, the managing of recorded production is very high over there in Israel. So the question is one which actually in the beginning I'd asked to Tarun also, that how do you consider digital use for the bottom of pyramid based dairy farmers?
I didn't hear the last part of the question. Could you repeat the
Yeah,
last sentence?
the dairy farmers who are in the bottom of pyramid, very unorganized, the smaller ones, 2 or 3 backyard kind of dairy farms. How do you feel that the technology actually can help them in improving their productivity?
So again, specifically for Israel, there is some advantage to being so small. There are many disadvantages, but there are some advantages. And one of the advantages is, for example, in the dairy sector. The dairy sector is quite unique. So I don't think we are very proud that we implemented such advanced technological solution across the whole dairy sector, and I'll explain what we did. But keep in mind that we are small, 150,000 cows in total, and the average milk yield of a cow is 30 liters, which is a lot, but not necessarily the most profitable. The average farm size is approximately 300 to 500 cows. The largest farm in Israel is approximately 2,000 cows. The smallest ones are 150, 200. So just to give you a ballpark figures. Now, what happened in Israel is, again, because there is a quota system and farmers are not competing against each other. Each farmer has a priori his approval to sell a specific quantity of milk. The only thing the farmer can do to make more money is to be better, not to sell more. He cannot sell more. He cannot sell less. He knows how much money he's going to get and how much milk he's going to provide. The only way to improve his profit is to work and optimize the way he works. And specifically in Israel, the only way you could do that, if the land is not there, and if you have to buy feed anyhow, and even import some feed additives, the only way to optimize there is via technology. That is why there was a very strong incentive to put in all the different types of technologies out there. And that is why 99% of the cows in Israel have some sort of sensor on them. Whereas in general in the world, I think it's less than a double-digit penetration. In Israel, 98% of the cows have some kind of monitoring specifically on them. The next good thing that happened is that because the farmers are not competing, all the farmers are on the same, let's call it the same data platform that Girish mentioned. All the data is in one place. So you could say it's like the pinnacle of what in other countries you're trying to achieve. Again, we had some favorable conditions to achieve that. We're small, farmers are not competing, and actually the agriculture sector also, when the country started, the agriculture sector got a lot of incentives, and the farmers were allowed and felt they had like a joint mission in that process when the state was starting. When you go to the US, and most of my work was in the US and in Europe, Israel, because it was so small, it was just a one big beta site for the technological companies. It's just a test case, but it's very small. By the way, interesting to mention, we are in the COVID area. Same happened with the Pfizer vaccine, by the way. Israel became a very famous test case of the Pfizer vaccine. Why? Because it's small, and due to its size, it was easy, specifically in this case, to vaccinate very fast many people, and also all the data was shared between 3 bodies that covered all the population. So you immediately could understand exactly the efficacy of the vaccine. It's the same, these same ground rules is what also happened in this case in Israel. So yes, we have all of the data is not siloed. The data is shared. The producers in Israel, there are only three large producers, and they as well share the data amongst themselves. Of course, there are disadvantages to this. Of course, farmers are having a hard time. When you have such big companies that control the industry, farmers are having a hard time to keep their price competitive enough. And to your question specifically on the farmers, of course, are utilizing many of these insights. So specifically, cow health is monitored, and I saw also a question from the audience. So the cow health in the farms is monitored using sensors like sensors that monitor rumination and behavior and feeding practices. So you could identify not only improve reproduction practices, but of course also monitor general health in the farm and individual cow health in the farm. So all that together is the reasons why things happened as they happened in the Israeli sector. But I don't think will be the case in many countries. What will be the case and what will be the reason for the adoption of these technologies in other countries is at the end of the day, the consumers themselves, the consumers that want, and the companies that sell to the consumers that want to gain the consumer trust. They want to see that food is safe, that they want to see that there is traceability and that there is transparency in the system. So these will be the reasons, I think, in other types of countries for the proliferation of these technologies, not necessarily, I would say, the favorable conditions that we had here in Israel.
Thanks, Alon. I think that makes sense, and it was my absolute privilege